Our first speaker is Assadullah Keshtmand. Assadullah Keshtmand was born in 1949 in a family of humble background in Kabul province. He completed his secondary schooling in Afghanistan and attended university in France, where he completed his undergraduate and postgraduate degrees. While he was in France, he joined the French Communist Party. He was later elected to the Central Committee of the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan, the PDPA, and was the first editor-in-chief of the Haqiqat-e-Inqilab, a Saur newspaper, which was a government organ of the PDPA in 1980. He also served for several years as deputy head of the International Relations Bureau of the Central Committee of the PDPA. And in the final 5 years of that government, Mr. Keshtmand served as ambassador to the Democratic Republic, of the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan, to Hungary, to Iran, and to Ethiopia. He currently lives in London.
La défaite des États-Unis en Afghanistan.
The US defeat in Afghanistan is a moral defeat. Before we get into the heart of the subject, the defeat of the US in Afghanistan, let's try to find out the ins and outs of this defeat. Was what happened in Afghanistan a real defeat in the true sense of the word? Was it really a defeat if the US failed to clean up what they call the terrorist base in Afghanistan? I have to say at the outset that I believe that the US has not lost in Afghanistan, but they just completely changed their policy. The US policy is not based on the war against the Taliban, or, as they claim, against terrorism, but it pursues more important objectives than a war with the Taliban without discipline or without any agenda. When one speaks of the US military defeat, one naturally imagines scenes of battle. The truth on the ground shows that during the 20 years of the US military presence in Afghanistan, no battle, no real conflict was engaged against the Taliban, except for the blitzkrieg that ended the Taliban rule. These two powers were in great imbalance. On the one hand, the army of a superpower, highly operational and constantly ready for military action, equipped with the most advanced and sophisticated weapons, and on the other hand, scattered groups without any modern military and political organization and without external support. It was unimaginable that these two armies could even confront each other. If we take a look at the circumstances that led to the invasion of Afghanistan under the pretext of fighting terrorism and the assassination of Osama bin Laden, we can conclude that the purpose of the occupation of Afghanistan was the control of its strategic location. There is no logical reason for the invasion of Afghanistan. The core of terrorism responsible for 9/11 was elsewhere, not in Afghanistan. To justify its military presence in Afghanistan after the fall of Taliban in 2001, the US tolerated the activities of scattered Taliban groups and a controlled war against the US-led Afghan government. And at the same time, the US silently and quietly advanced its plans to expand its influence in Central Asia in a complicated and ambiguous policy. Many observers now believe that after these essentially secret preliminaries, the US is preparing the next stage of its plan. This new phase would include the gradual and calculated introduction of disorder and chaos in Central Asia and in the Xinjiang province in China by provoking unrest and border wars. All the foundations of this plan were already ready and in place in the north and the northeast of Afghanistan. The violent and fundamentalist, belligerent and fundamentalist Daesh warriors have been transferred from Syria and Iraq into Afghanistan. The information about their transfer to Afghanistan has been revealed for several years, and increasingly by the media in the region and the Russian representatives to the United Nations. Hamid Karzai also denounced the arrival of unknown individuals transported by American helicopters in northern Afghanistan near the Central Asia region. These Daesh fighters are mainly Chechen, Tajik, Uzbek, from Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uyghur, and other Caucasian people who are preparing an attack on Central Asia. The people of Afghanistan are threatened by great dangers, and it is feared that Afghanistan will become the spearhead of aggression against our neighbors in Central Asia and the scene of a bloody war. All indicators point to the fact that the US plans are moving into the direction of creating unrest in Central Asia. The countries of Central Asia, China and Iran, are in a state of maximum anxiety and have undertaken preventive actions in the diplomatic and operational fields. In the opinion of almost all political observers in Afghanistan, the events of the last 2 months reveal that the long-term plan of the United States first staged the Taliban as a political force in the framework of the Qatar diplomatic negotiations, and then paved the way for the group to take power. This plan is justified by Afghanistan's strategic importance in Southwest Asia and in the Central Asian neighborhood. The United States easily invited Afghanistan after the breakup of the Soviet Union and before the rebirth and assertion of Russia on the international scene, and it had enough time and means to develop new plans that were inconceivable in the past. The main goal of the strategy is to establish foothold in Central Asia, and Afghanistan became a key part of this plan. The other parts of this plan seek to impact Iran and China. All these objectives became possible with the occupation of Afghanistan. 20 years were enough for the Americans to prepare the Taliban's medieval fundamentalist rebel groups to become an effective tool for the implementation of their plans. It should not be forgotten that in the fight against Russia, Iran, and China, the economic and political revival of the United States. So the United States want to change the future of the people in that region, and they want to find a religious fundamentalist base. And they want to follow the model of Saudi Arabia. Afghanistan will become the export center of religious terrorism, and the Brzezinski cherished doctrine of using a special form of political Islam will be worked out. Considering this new situation, I think it's likely that this plan will not succeed. It will, of course, depend heavily on the unpredictable nature of the Taliban's attitude. The Taliban is a movement without a program or organization, and its supporters are mainly illiterate and prone to political, social, and cultural retardation. the Taliban's internal differences and the existence of various groups with different interpretations of the Islamic Sharia and the transformation in their political vision make the realization of this plan very difficult. Although the first steps of the Taliban after taking power, guided by their masters, were less tense than before, they very soon gave way to violence and brutality. The main reason is that the Taliban masters are gradually entering the scene, and the contradiction between the backward vision of the Taliban is confronting the population in its society, administration, and everyday life. The small group of Taliban elites who made a relative successful show in the early days of their takeover of power, in accepting others, are now being overwhelmed by the torrent of Taliban coming down from the mountains and villages that have only known misery, war, and resentment. The population is faced with the typical behavior of the Taliban, as they already knew, and no longer with the democracy of the first days after their takeover. In conclusion, it can be said that the return of the Taliban to power is a great moral defeat for the US. At this point, it can be said that the US has lost in Afghanistan. This is the most stinging defeat known to an omnipotent superpower. The people of the world are witness of this truth. The United States, which invaded Afghanistan with the promise of building a democratic and advanced Afghanistan, have abandoned the Afghan people, leaving them in misery. By putting the Taliban in power, the Americans have committed a historic injustice and horror against the people of Afghanistan and modern civilized humanity as a whole. The women of our country, who were trying to emancipate themselves gradually, are once again trapped in the evil circle of persecution and atrocious oppression. Our people are under the yoke of the Taliban's dictatorship, political, social, and cultural injustice, which oppresses other religions, thoughts, ethnies, and tribes other than their own. The Americans have shown the world that for them, moral principles have no value at all, and that their ferocious interests come first at all levels, everywhere. Thank you for your attention.